I'd like to call this meeting of the Carson City Historic Resources Commission for Thursday, May 12th, 2022 at the Bob Crowell Boardroom to order. Danielle, can you call the roll?
Chairperson Drews.
Here.
Vice Chair Schmitter. Here. Commissioner Block. Here. Commissioner Hayes. Here. Commissioner Darney. Here. Commissioner Smith. Here. Commissioner Spielda. Here. A quorum is present.
Next item is public comment. Any members of the public who wish to address the commission may speak so now or at the end of the meeting or during the item. Is there any public comment? Hearing none, we'll move to item 4, approval of minutes from the March 10th, 2022 meeting. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Item number 5, meeting items. HR 5A, HRC-2022-0112 for possible action, discussion and possible action regarding a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors regarding a request for an historic tax deferment on properties owned single-family 6,000 SF6 located at 77 West Robinson Street, APN 003-242-04. Hope.
Hope Sullivan, Community Development Director. The subject home was built between 1866 and 1870 and is known as the Posey or Bender House. The original owners have an association with the V&T Railroad. The site is in good condition, and I drove by today because I was curious if that gate was still going to be there and what it would look like. And so, yes, the wrought iron gate is there on the outside of the porch, and we all remember that program. But all the alterations that have been done to the subject property have been reviewed by HRC and found to be consistent with the design guidelines for the district. This request is due to a change of ownership, so staff does recommend that the HRC recommend approval of the tax deferment to the board.
Thanks, Hope. Any questions regarding the property? Any public comment? Hearing none, I guess I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Do we need to be specific about what we just?
Okay.
Is the motion consistent with the proposed motion of the staff report?
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Okay, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Next item, we could beat our record. 5B, HRC-2022-0203 for possible action, discussion, and possible action regarding a request to remove 5 brick and mortar chimneys on property zone residential office, RO, located at 212 North Division Street, APN 003-202-04. Hope.
Thank you. I will point out to the commission the late material. It's a report from 2008 from the subject regarding the subject property. This subject home was constructed in 1874. The applicant, as the chair said, is proposing to remove 5 chimneys. Section 5.14.1 of the design guidelines for the historic district states in part that for historic buildings, roof features such as chimneys, dormers, and/or decorative elements are to be retained. The subject property is a contributing property in the district, and the chimneys are character defining. Per page 8 of the late material, which is the report on the Kelly Schultz house prepared in 2008, quote, all the brick flues are interior except for one on the north side, which is simpler in treatment with a different stovepipe extension. Features that may indicate is later. So it sounds like based on this report, we have 4 original flues and 1 stovepipe that's on the north side, and that has the exterior along the wall of the building that was at a later time. So there may be some flexibility with that northern chimney But in terms of just looking at the design guidelines do say that features such as chimneys are to be retained. Therefore, the staff would recommend that this application not be approved and that the chimneys be retained. Mr. Hutchins, representing the church, is present, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thanks, Hope. Any board member questions of Hope? Any board member questions of Mr. Hutchins?
Are the chimneys all in use, or?
Can you introduce yourself for the record?
My name is Brian Hutchins, and I represent the Methodist Church tonight. I do have a short presentation, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
I am Brian Hutchins. I am the chairman of the Board of Trustees for the Methodist Church. You have before you information regarding what is more than a 140-year-old building. And we are looking at 5 chimneys that are not in use and have not been in use for decades. And they are constantly degrading. We have an engineer's report before you that expresses better than I can the safety concerns from an engineer who looked at the situation. So we have an operational safety situation here, a concern about safety. We have a large operating preschool in this historic building with many little kids. Today I was on the property and I saw on the house in front, we had probably 12 to 15. I didn't count the kids, but there were at least that many little kids. And in another building behind it, we have another same number of kids. So this property is well used, certainly during the middle of the week, and it's used also for special events. We have an operating church next door that is consistent with around the time that the state came into being in 1863, 1864. We have a lot of events at the church as well, and this is part of the grounds of this church. And we think there is a safety concern here. We think that the safety concern trumps the historical preservation needs here. We think that repair is a temporary solution because they're always going to be degrading no matter how well you try to preserve the structure. The last repair, we believe, on the chimneys was about 8 to 10 years ago, as I recall. And they did some, and we're still degrading, still concerned. But the big concern now is if something happens with those chimneys during the time when we have little kids around, staff, other individuals, it could be a real safety concern. Falling bricks. The church, as you know, is historical. It's as old, if not older, than the state. And the church has been in existence since then. The church appreciates and wants to preserve history. So you know we have a history of that. We have historical buildings here. We do our best to keep those historic buildings restored and in good operating condition. But in this case, we think that the chimneys are relatively minor features. We think that we would ask that the commission allow us to remove these chimneys. The commission did allow us to remove a covering that was between the house and the garage and the outhouse recently. Of course, it was a minor structure. We think that the chimneys are relatively minor as well. But we think in this instance, safety trumps this. And we would like to continue to have an operating preschool, which is what is in the building now. We don't have an awful lot of those. And preschools and childcare in this city are something that we need to value. And perhaps in this instance, more than the historical aspect of the building, just with regard to having chimneys that are not functioning and have not been functioning for decades. So with that, I would ask that you approve the application. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
I have a couple comments. I read Mr. Schaefer's structural observation, nothing calculated. I think what disturbed me is that the report by Mr. Schaefer didn't provide how they could restore those chimneys. It was just, I think they should come down. There was nothing there to qualify how they might be saved. I look at page 5 in the photograph with the chimneys, and I look at page 9. I do think they are character-defining features of the building. I myself have had the opportunity to do 2 projects within the district and save those chimneys. I know how easy it is to get up there and actually do that work. And in my opinion, they're character-defining and they should stay.
I agree with Dawn, and I think that they're definitely character-defining features. In fact, I think we've had them in our scavenger hunt of building elements. Building elements. So it would be quite a loss to have those removed. Those brick chimneys were built with mortar that comes out. It's a soft mortar, and so it can be easily replaced. And that's why it was made that way. It wasn't made to be so hard that the brick broke. So it's something that happens regularly. It's part of the maintenance of the house, and it's not that much of an expense as long as they're still standing to repoint the chimney, the brick. And as Don pointed out on the page 5 of the RCI report, he suggested strapping the north side chimney so that it would have some extra support on that side.
But was it the Ferris Mansion that had the chimneys completely redone a few years ago? Does anybody remember?
Gary Kane's house at 412 North Curry Street, that thing was added on, because he hates that I pull up old pictures before the chimney was put in there, or the fireplace. But that was pulling away in La Piccola. This was, 10, 15 years ago. They took it back down and then they built it back up with all the fasteners. And this one looks like probably 70 or 80 years old, I'm guessing. And there was another chimney over on Governor Stewart's house right there on, Minnesota and Robinson Street. And there's 2 chimneys on the outside of that building that were added on later, and the brick was really bad. And I saw the brick guys come and they took it down and added some new, and historic matching brick that was in better shape. But they rebuilt that, and that was last summer, but they did a really good job on that. And, I see them repairing chimneys all over the place. But
The one that we worked on was Mary's About Face, and we had 2 chimneys on that one. And we we don't control what happens within the building, but we went and got a structural engineer and came up with a way that we completely removed the chimneys from the attic down and then supported those with the roof structure above. And it was fairly inexpensive to do that and maintain those chimneys on that building.
Yeah,
There we go. I agree with most of what Don had just mentioned about the lack of having any kind of opinion about how these could be restored, because that's equally, I think, justifiable in this argument. But yes, just like all of you, we've done a few of these. Bob Fredlin, project he worked on Division and Telegraph had, I think, 3 chimneys that same thing. You take them down, you add some new structural integrity, steel or clips or anchors, whatever the case, and you rebuild them back up, and they're as good as new and for another 100 years. So I think these are in actually pretty good shape. yes, the mortar's coming apart and the bricks are falling off, but all in all, they can be restored. And I think they are an integral part of this structure. Now, I would be willing to have the conversation about the fifth chimney, which is the standalone alongside the building. That one, I believe there is an argument where the difference between, is it historically significant on this particular building, or is it an add-on from the future that I see as probably the most dangerous of them and would cost the most and would be the most difficult to support without it, compromising the look. But I don't think this is an original chimney. So I'd be willing to entertain allowing that one to be removed or shortened or something other than how it is currently. But the other four, I think, are too significant to remove. Thanks.
Couple comments. Yeah, Oliver went there. He's been out of your school for 3 years, and Annabelle just little blessings, small blessings. My grandchildren, and Annabelle had a great recital last month, and Dorothy's going to start next year. So you guys do a great job there. The chimneys, the three chimneys that I have in my house, and it was a little bit newer. It was 1875, and some bricks came down a few years ago, and like Rob said, the brick masons that I found, went down about 6 courses, and they put some structural wiring in there, and they rebuilt them, and they also capped them to keep all the water and elements and birds and everything else out of it. And so that was about 9 years ago, and they still look really good. And to Rob's question about chimney number 5, has that chimney been there more than 50 years? I would hazard to guess. Are we necessarily looking at what's original in the structure, or what is original and what is over 50 years that would be considered as historic improvement at that time? But nonetheless, it's been there a number of years. So I want to put that into consideration.
Mike? I absolutely agree, because I walk around there all the time. I see all the little kids, and I think there is a safety issue. If we have a seismic event, all those bricks are going to come down on the kids outside. I went there right away, and that you said that. I feel like these chimneys have been documented. I'm actually don't have a problem with them being removed. Everybody's going to hate me for saying that, but okay. Yeah, I just think that life safety trumps, and the way we're so appreciate that you're actually using the building. Strapping does have an impact on those features that we describe as historically significant. So while yes, the chimneys are original, and I'm not sure how you're proposing to do it, Don, but with the strapping, that's creating another impact on the building, and we don't want to overdo the strapping if we don't take it down, and we're not sure if the engineer hasn't proposed anything, but I'm just saying maybe we can compromise here. We have documentation of the chimneys, that pattern I drove around. It's not like that's a rare pattern the way the chimney was built. Sorry, that's my thought.
I just want to clarify a couple things. When we did the ones that I was involved with, I didn't want to see the strapping because I thought the strapping was a distraction. I wasn't told I have to do any of this. It was just that I want to put them back in the building. So I enlisted a civil engineer, and everything that we did to strengthen and hold those up was done concealed in the attic space of the building. Both my children attended Small Blessings, and my daughter turned out good. I don't know about my son. Can I blame you guys for that? Just kidding. But that's. But I will tell you that you can do this without any strapping on the exterior, except for the stovepipe part, which would have been there from day one. But it can all be done from underneath. It's really not that expensive. And I think if they go back to their structural engineer, that they could devise that. I'm happy to share the drawings that we did with our structural engineer when we did Mary's. It's not that hard, and you're able to maintain those, and they are safe now.
I'm going to add to that. We've done numerous of these chimneys, and they are capable of being taken down to a certain level and rebuilt with hidden internal structural elements that will support them better than they ever had been. So it's entirely possible. But that's the reason I would suggest keeping the 4 that are significant to the structure, because they are repairable. And we owe it to the Historic Society, to the Historic District, to make that attempt. We have that recommendation for windows, we have it for fences, we have it for everything else of the house. Chimneys should be no different. They appear to be in structural shape. They're not, they're deteriorating because the mortar's coming apart, but that's what we're going to replace. You replace the mortar, you put a mesh or a grill or screen or a rebars within the chimney, and it is completely repairable without any exterior ill thoughts for changing the outcome, the look of the chimney. Thank you.
You know,
Mr. Chair, if I can just make sure we're framing the discussion consistent with what we're supposed to do for the historic district. Okay, so we have a historic district because we have a concentration of historic resources. These resources, some are contributing, some are not contributing. Right now, we're discussing a contributing resource. When there's a request to modify the exterior of a resource, it comes before this commission. In your discussion on the resource and the request before you, you're looking at the design guidelines for the historic district and the Secretary of the Interior standards. And that's how you frame kind of the discussion. What the design guidelines tell us when we consider 5.14 guidelines for roofs, and if it says specifically 5.14.1 guidelines for historic buildings, so those are the contributing ones, not the non-contributing ones. What it tells us is other roof features such as chimneys, dormers, and/or decorative elements are to be retained. So like everything else you see, I feel like we're starting to deviate from how we're supposed to frame it, so I just wanted to revisit that. Thank you.
yeah,
Make one
that's-
comment.
That's
That's
what
why
I was gonna bring
I
up.
stated character defining in how I started my discussion.
I think we're looking at a few things here, Brian. One is, most of us agree, all of us agree that they are character defining features of that building. There's very few buildings in the historic district that have 5 chimneys, and the chimney caps themselves are another element that defines that character. Our guidelines say we should retain those. They can be retained. You're really fortunate that the maintenance that's been done on them was done with lime mortar. Otherwise, that brick would be falling apart. You'd have dust. If we're going to rebuild them, we have to make sure that we don't use Portland cement mortar, that the mason uses lime mortar again. It'll get another 140 years life or less and you could keep maintaining it. But that's really critical. We had a training years ago from a stonemason out in Salt Lake City that came out, and we had it at the Brewery Arts Center, and he was talking about that building, and it's the same thing. It's using the wrong mortars. Bricks breathe. If you put a watertight mortar in there that's heavy in Portland cement, the cement stays, the stone or the brick around it falls apart. So that's going to be a real important consideration if we decide we need to keep those. Secretary standards also, I think, say that we should keep character defining features and try to repair and replace. And I think Don and Rob are both right. You can do it, make them more seismically effective by repointing it. And at least get those 4 chimneys back into shape.
I wouldn't make that recommendation if I felt that there was a compromise based on the fact that the children are the ones occupying the structure. However, again, risking having everyone hate me, daycare can be moved. The church can decide that 2 years from now, it's not a daycare anymore, and we lost the chimneys. So that doesn't do anybody any good 30 years down the road. As cruddy as that sounds, it's a fact that we still have to consider.
Well, we have to get, we can consider it, but it's really not under our purview to decide public safety items on a historic structure. It's not under our purview to decide public safety items on a historic structure. We're looking at our guidelines, Secretary of Interior standards, and a real narrow framework of preservation, not public safety. It's something, you know, if we had an earthquake, we'd be looking at something different. We'd be looking, okay, so what buildings have to come down because they're imminently in danger of total collapse, things like that. But in this instance, we're looking at our guidelines, Secretary of Interior standards, and what we have purview over.
Sir, as safety is another department. It's true, you know, we're charged with dealing with, in particular, what people see from the outside, not what goes on inside. You know, it might be a modern, totally modern structure in there. You have no idea. That's not our purview either. But on the other hand, as the board's physician, resident physician here, I just want to say I care about safety, and it's absolutely clear to me that if you handle the restoration correctly and take care of these elements that deserve to be cared for as they age, you will deal with the safety issue at the same time. All these hidden elements that support it and make it stronger than it ever was, actually, really, if you add some modern things and rebuild those bricks around it and so on. So you just need the right folks working on it that understand the goal of, which is indeed our charge, and the safety issues will take care of themselves. And I do want to say I'm not as wedded to that fifth chimney hanging on the outside and trying to fall away at the moment. I don't know. I'd be open to suggestions of how we could deal with that. It's certainly old enough, as was pointed out, to be an historic element of its own. I'm pretty darn sure about that. But nonetheless, it's a different category than the four that are really part of the original. It's the most interesting and entertaining roof relative to chimneys that I see in the historic district. To me, I just always found it fascinating. So I'd like to see it built back up and be safe for whoever's standing under it. Might be me, I'm living nearby, you know.
Mr. Chairman, may I make some comments now that everybody's spoken?
Sure.
I'm glad you clarified exactly what your situation is here as a Historic Resources Commission, and I'm glad that's a part of the record, because we are, as the Methodist Church, is definitely in favor of preserving historic buildings. But we, in this instance, are more concerned about public safety and the safety of little children especially, but a lot of adults as well using the facilities in that area. And we think the public safety trumps in this situation. And yes, we can continue to read the guidelines from the secretary, but those guidelines don't discuss public safety either. So maybe you need to tell us where we go to get a body that will look at the public safety.
Well,
Let me just finish, and you can probably address everything. We are still going to be contributing to the historic district just by keeping that house. We're keeping the Methodist Church as well, which is even older. And in that block is just a lot of history. Okay, you might lose some chimneys and some real defining features if you like those chimneys that much, but you still have a wonderful house. And you have preserved at least you've got photographs of the chimneys that you can show as well. But what is more important? Is it having the historical aspects of it, of having chimneys, or is it of being concerned for the public safety? And are you going to be able to assure us that once we rehabilitate these chimneys, as you suggest, that it's going to withstand any kind of seismic event, even though you've put them to what you think they should be restored? Can you assure us that we're not going to have to worry about it in the event of a large earthquake? And then Are you authorizing a rehabilitation if you're going to deny us the opportunity to remove those chimneys, which we think is the most important thing to do right now? And bricks deteriorate too. You did talk about the bricks, and they deteriorate based on some of the mortar you might put in there, but that may not. We've got some bricks deteriorating now. It didn't depend on the mortar. It's all going to deteriorate over a period of time. We're just putting it off until a later period of time. Then we'll have the big event. So that's our position, and we would ask that you approve our request.
Well, Brian, I think we're trying to find a compromise here. I mean, we recognize that the chimneys are in a state of disrepair. Your structural report states that pretty clearly. What
Right.
we're offering is a way to bring those up to current standards, help solve that safety problem. If we decide that, yeah, that fifth chimney on the outside can be removed, that takes the one that looks to be in the worst condition structurally. There's not a whole lot of support on the outside. If that falls and somebody's standing there, you are in trouble. The ones on the interior, if those are rebuilt, they can be brought up to seismic standards and aren't much of a problem. If there's deteriorating brick, you can find replacement materials that match the older historic brick, and it all works. That way we get to keep the character defining features of that historic structure, and we accomplish the safety goals. So I think that's the way the board's leaning on
But
this.
it's not, when you say we get to
We
accomplish it,
as Carson City.
but it's we as the church expending the resources to bring this up to standard. And also at the same time, try to keep a preschool open in this city.
You know, this is the part where we sound like we don't care, but we do. First of all, I want to be really clear. You have a building in the historic district that requires a certain amount of maintenance. If you can't afford that maintenance, you need to vacate the building. You have a responsibility of the owner of that building to keep that building maintained and take care of it. We're not going to tell you that you can fix those chimneys with our approval. My statement was, go back to your structural engineer that did not provide an evaluation. He provided an observation. They didn't look at anything structural with those. They didn't provide a way that they could be fixed. I'll use another couple of examples when you talk about defining character. When the Capitol was completely gutted and the mortar was replaced in that so our Capitol building wouldn't fall down, should we have just thrown the Capitol building away? No, I think the Capitol building is a defining feature of our community, and the money was spent to fix it. I'll use your own building by looking at plate 5 in the report. If you were to replace those windows, if you're worried about safety, that's plate glass. Those aren't, that's not tempered glass. Those don't meet code today, but we're not telling you to change those. If you're worried about your kids, those can hurt them just as much as a brick falling on their head. I think what I'm getting to is you have a responsibility as the owner. Because you may have a financial difficulty, that's not something that we can take into consideration as this board. And I apologize, but we have a direction that we have to follow. To me, those are character-defining features. I know that they can be fixed. I've done it myself. I vote that, I agree with everybody on the freestanding one, but not on the other 4.
Yeah. I've also had experience repointing chimneys and rebuilding them on an 1855 house, and it's still standing today, 25 years later. So it can be done in a reasonable fashion. It doesn't, mortar's pretty cheap, actually, and a stonemason could probably fix those. And you're taking off the roof, so you have the opportunity to go below the roof line and support them. And it just seems reasonable to do it that way, and that way we're saving the character of the building, saving the chimneys that are character defining. It's an awesome building. We love that building, so we'd like to keep it intact. And that's mainly what we do here, is trying to keep buildings intact, because everybody wants to take off this or change that. And if you keep doing that one piece at a time, you're not going to have anything left. And so that's what we're here for, is to try to maintain sort of the very, the essence of what the historic district is all about. So I hope you'll reconsider.
Mike, I know my house is a year newer, 1875. And inside, when we did the work and exposed chimneys, there were where they had pie hole covers, plates or whatever, and we had some bricks put back in, Carson City bricks that came from, and they were repaired in that fashion on the inside. And in the last 3-4 years, when we had a couple good seismic events here in town, standing between my kitchen and my one-story portion going, oh my God, there's not a single Simpson fastener in this thing. There's not a metal fastener in the house. And I looked at the chimneys because there's a couple hairline cracks that have been there since I bought it 20 years ago. And where they repaired and put new bricks in, there's no damage, there's no cracks, there's not anything. When I had some structural engineering work done for the house, I said, wouldn't it make sense if we just filled the chimneys full of concrete so they can't break? And Wayne said, well, you know what? Your whole house is moving. And if you put something rigid like that in there, it doesn't do it any favor. The whole thing's kind of designed to make it move. And it's like, good point. There's still not a metal fastener in the house. But at some point in time, if you have the opportunity and like me to show you what the last seismic events have done, and, we've witnessed in the last 6 months, the trees that got blown down on Nevada Street, the big trees, the one at the Presbyterian Church, and your spark arresters are still up there, and those brackets are doing more than what I think Keith's report reads, that it doesn't look like they're doing any good, but they must be. So, it's, we just love this place. I mean, your church was built in 1866. It was the Methodist Episcopal Church, and until the Episcopalians built their own church, and this was built in between, and it's just a show place for the Kit Carson Trail and everything. I mean, I think they can be saved, fixed, and, it's like we have discussion on windows. They weren't made to last 140 years, but they have, and the chimneys have. And so, I hope that you would consider some kind of restoration in retaining those as well.
Just one last comment. We'll focus on the north chimney, the one along the side of the house. If you look at page 8 of your report, that gives you several different photographs of that chimney. And there's one on page 13, which is a part of the engineer report. It's 12 and 13, showing that the chimney has been separating from the house itself. It is not in use, hasn't been in use, as I said earlier, but we are concerned about that separation as well. Even though we've had the guide wires up on top for quite a while, that hasn't prevented the bowing of the chimney structure itself. And you can see it coming away from the building. I believe also I recall seeing a little bit of cracking on the inside wall near that chimney as well. So, no, I'm not an engineer. I'm not a mason or anything like that, so I can't sit here and tell you how easy or how difficult that's going to be. But it would certainly take quite a initiative to get that restored back to the way it should be and really safe. I grew up in Southern California. I'm used to earthquakes, and I've been in very, very large ones, but I know the damage that those earthquakes, the large ones, the ones that we don't get here typically, what they can do. And if we get a really big one, I know what that's going to do to these chimneys.
I'd just like to comment. I went to med school at USC, and I was working all night in the chemistry lab when the big one hit that killed 60-something out in San Fernando Valley that, killed 60-something people. And it was an interesting experience. This was my second floor lab had no windows, just instant blindness, absolutely black, until the generators came on. But the reality is, when I went home, my little apartment where I was, the old chimney had partly fallen down. But the main point is, I think it just didn't have any great support system underneath. You know, we can have these rebuilt so they are stronger than they ever were, and you won't see those added extra things hanging on. And probably may be the only thing left standing in a big one, you know, with a really well-built chimney. But indeed, my house had bricks littering the driveway, for sure, because it was just, you know, simply built, and down she came, and that what was quite a big quake at the time. So I appreciate the concern, and I think we can deal with it and by doing it really right, and with people who know what they're doing.
I just want to cover one last thing on those chimneys we did on Second Street. And just for clarification, we are in the same seismic zone as San Francisco. So we are very active that way. And so when we did ours, they were designed to withstand the same type of earthquake that San Francisco would have. There was no steel used. It was all done with wooden timbers up in the attic. So it was very, very easy to do. We did the whole thing in 2 days.
Mike, can I add? Just getting back to your comment about what we've been calling fifth chimney, the one, is that on the west elevation, is that north elevation? When I walked by there, it's obvious this was an afterthought. The chimney cap, the metal thing on top is a completely different configuration. Similar in design, but completely different. And they originally would have never shoehorned a chimney between two windows like that. So in my opinion, this is an afterthought. I don't have any, in other words, what I'm trying to say is I don't consider this to be the historically significant or for this particular house. So I have no issues if that chimney comes down. That's how I'll vote. The other four, I still am vehemently that those can be repaired. Just to address your case of assurances, this would have to go through the building department and be engineered and be approved and be scrutinized, and it would come with the same assurances that you would get if you were to drive into the Nuggets parking structure. Will that parking structure fall down and crush you? In an extreme seismic event, it very well may, but so will every other building. This house was built in 1874. The entire house is a threat to the children. So if it's that, the church has that as their main concern, then possibly they should consider relocating the daycare center. Obviously, the foundation is rock. It's not concrete. There's no metal connectors in the entire house. It's subject to hurricane or high wind tearing the roof off. I mean, you can just go right down the list. So again, it's not our purview to consider safety, but it's also not our purview to consider cost or financial burdens. But in this case, if this were a new building or a new occupancy that they were changing, and in order to put a daycare center in, they were required to remove the brick, would we allow that? We wouldn't. We'd say, find a different location for your daycare center. If the daycare center decides to move in 2 years, regardless of what we say tonight, we lost the chimneys, and that's going to be converted back to an office. Again, we lost the chimneys because of something temporary. When we did a remodel on the old casino, the Golden Nugget, I think they called it, we had canopies that protruded into the egress space for the governor. So that drew the wrath of the whole state down upon us. We are allowed to do that because they're built to be temporary. They could be removed. That's why they allowed it to happen. In this kind of scenario, we don't have that option. If we allow it to be removed, it's gone. It's not coming back. So I don't agree with the four, but I would vote to remove the fifth one.
I just have an observation for the north chimney. Apparently it was put there before the wrought iron fence. So it looks like the wrought iron fence butts right into that. So, I mean, how long's that fence been there? That's just kind of a curiosity thing. I know it's been there for 58 years that I've been walking by there. Well, I don't walk so good anymore, but I mean, since I was a kid. So, I mean, that does give you an indication of age. You know, to let that chimney go, yes, it's been added on. Gary Kane's house, 412 North Curry Street, that was added on, but they went to the means to restore it because it is part of the history. And if we're just getting rid of add-ons that aren't original to buildings, I think we risk something there. Now, at the same time, you look at it, there's a big height to it. I mean, maybe just bringing it down some and you know, taking it down below the eave to put the fasteners in there to connect it to the building, just like they did at 412 North Curry Street. I think the spark arresters, yeah, it's probably newer. It's probably a 1930s thing than the other ones. But when it was originally built, they had those spark arresters on there. So we have to, you know, we say 50 years and we say the frontage and, you know, life, health, and safety, but that fence has been there for a long time. And, you know, the same thing could have been said about the fence, that, you know, that stands a risk for kids to put their heads through, so they put pipes down with little wing nuts so that doesn't happen. I mean, there's ways to make it safe and to keep it. I think that tells part of the story as well.
So if we take down the north, or the fifth chimney on the north side, we do have extra brick too, which can be used to repair any of the broken brick on the remaining 4 chimneys. So you've got an advantage there. Any repairs where that chimney is going to have to be consistent with the building design as well. So,
Mike, when you're looking at the old brick too, I have some of the brick that came out of Bob Gilly's house. I have some that we took off my chimneys that were inside bricks that we took out and just used stronger bricks on the inside. So there are bricks that you can have. They're a block away from you guys. So we've got that too.
Mr. Chair, in the staff report, there's a recommended motion. I'd like to modify that motion in terms of the staff recommendation based on this discussion for your consideration. And so the way it would read, as staff would recommend it, is I move to deny HRC 2022-0203 based on the finding that the request is not consistent with the design guidelines for the Historic District and for the Secretary of the Interior standards, as noted in the staff report and as discussed by the Commission on the record at its meeting of May 12, 2022, although the newer chimney on the north side may be removed as it is not original.
I'd like to add that the 4 remaining chimneys are a character-defining feature of the property. There are methods to repair the loose mortar on the other chimneys. But I think with that, we've covered everything.
It could potentially say, I move to deny HRC 2022-0203 for the 4 original chimneys, which are character defining and can be repaired as has been done on other chimneys in the district. And finding that the request is, that's kind of clunky. I don't like that.
I think I'd go with the motion, Hope,
Yeah.
that is, as it's written.
Yeah.
And then additional findings are just, or how did you word the
What I added.
demolition of the fifth?
What I added to, and maybe if I just add it will make sense, keep it as is it's written, and then add the following wording. And as discussed by the commission on the record at its meeting of May 12, 2022, although the newer chimney on the north side may be removed as it is not original, period. The four interior chimneys are original and there are methods to repair.
There are original or character-defining features, and there are methods to repair. And then I think it's covered. If we've got the guidelines, both of our guidelines covered,
Okay.
and those additional findings.
So for the benefit of the record, the motion would be as written in the staff report with the following additional language and this is for the commission's consideration. We would add the following language. And as discussed by the commission on the record at its meeting of May 12, 2022, although the newer chimney on the north side may be removed as it is not original. The four chimneys are original and character defining, and there are methods to repair.
When it comes to time, I would like to make a motion that contains what Hope just said.
Is there any other discussion? Is there any public comment?
Did you get a second?
I haven't asked for a motion yet. Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion, and it has to be verbatim to what.
I would like to move that we go with the staff report's language to amend the recommendation from keeping them all to retaining the character defining features. The four, the one that's non-original that was done at a later date can be removed. And if I missed anything, whatever was on the public record.
You want to modify that just to, you move to?
I moved to what Hope said.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's the, for the benefit of the record, Commissioner Block, you're making a motion consistent with the proposed motion I placed on the record just a short time ago? That is correct. Thank you.
And
That is correct.
this is Todd Reese, Deputy DA. If I can just clarify the motion further. Technically, what you're doing is you're granting the motion in part as to the north chimney because the north chimney is not original to the building, and you are denying the request in part as to the remaining four chimneys because those four chimneys are character-defining traits of the building.
So
that
actually,
correct?
with that said, what we can say is I move to approve the removal of the chimney on the north side as it is not original, and the request for the removal of the four original character-defining chimneys is denied based on the finding that is not consistent with the design guidelines for the historic district and the Secretary of the Interior standards, as noted in the staff report and as discussed by the commission on the record at its meeting of May 12th, 2022, and noting that there are methods to repair these chimneys.
Just,
That works for me.
Wait. How do we know that chimney is not original? We have to watch our original. What does it say?
I read it to you, page 8 of the 2008 report. It says,
The addition.
the flues, all of the brick flues are interior except for the one on the north side, which is simpler in treatment with a different stovepipe extension,
That
features
may
that may
indicate
indicate is later.
it
So
is
we don't
later.
know 100%
Right,
it's later.
that's what I'm saying. Just be careful with original.
Okay.
And I, as an architect, verified that.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? Did he amend it? Yes. Second. Motion and a second. Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
No, because then I need a reason. I know how this works.
Or,
Danielle, what do you have for a vote?
For a vote?
Correct.
Let's call for a vote again. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm not used to calling the vote.
That's okay. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. There we go. Thanks, Brian. And I'm sure Don's available if you want to talk to him about good stonemasons or, yeah. Thanks, Brian. Item 6, staff reports, discussion only. Hope.
Okay, a couple items. First, May is Historic Preservation Month, and so the Board of Supervisors did pass a resolution or proclamation recognizing that. They also, with the chairman, awarded the Bank Saloon the award for the Outstanding Historic Preservation Project for 2021. The scavenger hunt is underway, so that's exciting. Other items. Couple months ago, when the chair gave his month or his annual report to the Board of Supervisors, there was discussion about, and actually it's kind of timely we're having this discussion about maintenance issues in the district. And the chair brought this up and brought the concern up to the board. As a follow-up to that, I spoke to the board in February at their retreat about whether or not they wanted to expand the facade grant program to include the residential properties for contributing properties in the historic district. The board did not want to pursue that. The board wanted to focus redevelopment money on infrastructure projects and not private property. So I did want you to know that I did follow up on the chair's comments to the board. Also, actually, just today, I spoke to one of the compliance officers, and I've instructed him to inventory the areas in both redevelopment areas as well as the historic district for weeds, so that we're proactively addressing that and not waiting for complaints to come in. So he will start that. I told him to put on his work program for next week. So we will start going out in the district and in the redevelopment areas next week and checking on weeds and contacting property owners.
Thanks, Hope. If we were to find some other monies, and a few people have approached me with, the appetite to maybe start a fund or something like that. I think the supervisors would go for that if we had a separate historic preservation fund that we could use.
Well, what the Board of Supervisors manages is public money. So the question is, are you talking about public money or private money? And if it's private money, you may want to look at something like the Historic Society as a place to house it, as opposed to commingling the private and the public money. Having said that, the Parks and Rec, I believe, has some private money that they work with as well. So that's something we can certainly have a conversation with. I don't know that's in the purview of the Historic Resource Commission, but we can talk about that in ways we can create incentives for the district.
Yeah, I was thinking about something like the Parks Foundation and how if we
Just-
could do it as non-public funded.
Just an FYI, when the Historical Society and the Foundation for the Betterment of Carson City Parks and Rec had commingled funds and everything, we separated that out. And Mayor Bagwell and I started the Foundation for Carson City Parks and Rec, which is an umbrella 501c3 that helps other nonprofits if they have projects and stuff like that. I think that might be a better venue or avenue to go than with the Carson City Historical Society, because there's more, I think there's more guidance with that than just the society that's trying to keep the Foreman Roberts house.
And Mr. Chair, one more thing I just want to mention, I'm sorry I didn't mention it earlier, concerning the scavenger hunt. I want to just thank publicly Jim Phelan for continuing, and the Fox Brew Pub for continuing to supply and donate the prize for the scavenger hunt. It's now been 3 years, and we really appreciate that he continues to support it.
Yeah, that's good.
I'd like to thank Luann for doing it. Appreciate that very much. Yeah, no, a
And
couple
Michelle for writing it.
sentences.
And just so you know, they wanted a letter for the Fox Brew Pub about the donation. So I wrote a letter and I passed it. I had Heather say that that was okay to do. And on myself and behalf of the commission, we thank them for doing that.
Thanks, commission members. Any other commission member reports? I need to apologize to Aaron West. I kept calling him, I had Batman on my mind that day. I kept calling him Adam, yeah. Yeah, he said he's been Adam all his life, so, and he drives a black truck. Any other commission member reports? Future,
I'll try to keep my mouth shut one of these days. When I was driving down here on Roop Street, there's a house on the corner of Proctor and Roop, and it's the Sanford House. It's a little yellow house down here that had music lessons. They're building a brand new house right next to it. Shiplap, there's board and batten on the top. So, I mean, I think it's kind of cool that somebody's doing something new that's emulating a historic house.
I believe the Yellow House was added to the district years ago as well. It was one of the first ones that came to us and wanted to have that house appended to the district.
And my biggest quandary, George Sanford owned that house, and I'm trying to figure out the link because he ended up owning 412 North Curry Street, probably about 1910. So there's that, and he was an attorney with Samuel Platt back in the day, which is pretty interesting to me.
Future agenda items?
I have a question relative to the next line, next meeting. It says July 7th, but that's the first Thursday of July, so should it be the 14th? That's our tradition, right? Second Thursday.
Yeah,
So,
but I won't be here on the July 14th date, I think. No, is that true? No, on the 7th we won't be here.
just an
So-
observation.
Maybe that's.
I will have Heather Ferris look into it and follow up with the commission.
Any other items? Any public comment? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned.